Hello, we are incredibly fortunate to have Paul Cartledge, who's the A.G. Leventis Senior Research Fellow at Clare College and Emeritus A.G. Leventis Professor of Greek Culture, with us today. Professor Cartledge has publications on a wide range of ancient Greek topics, including Sparta, Thebes, and Alexander the Great. In keeping with our theme of the unimaginable this year, Professor Cartledge is going to be giving us a talk on Alexander the Great's unimaginable conquest. So Paul, whenever you're ready.
Hello everyone, I'm Paul Cartledge. I'm speaking to you from Cambridge. It's an absolute privilege and pleasure to be able to speak to you, but I'm sorry I can't be there in person. The theme of your conference, your discussion is the unimaginable, and I imagine that the most unimaginable ancient figure in terms of what he achieved, not of course by himself, but what he achieved in the course of about a decade, is Alexander, nicknamed after his death, the Great. So you see on the slide, the first slide, my title slide. If I may have the next slide, please. So this is the cover of a Swedish translation of my book on Alexander the Great, which of course originally came out in English, Alexander den Store. And on the cover is one of the many, many images of Alexander, a few either in his lifetime or very close to his lifetime, that Alexander personally authorized. He was one of the first rulers to be very concerned for his image, what he would be thought of in terms of the way he looked. So you see the lion-like mane of hair, you see the deep-set eyes, the slightly tilted head, looking far into the distance because, well, he thought he could go to the ends of the earth. And what he hoped to achieve by going to the ends of the earth is another question. We'll move on to that with the next slide, please. So this is just to show you Aegean Greece, the far eastern end of the Mediterranean, modern state of Greece with just a little bit of Turkey, and then above Greece, Bulgaria. And we're going to look at Macedonia very shortly. It occurs right up the top of Greece. You'll see a kind of crab-like three-pointed peninsula coming down. That is the southern bit of Macedonia, which extended right across northern Greece, such that this was not where modern Republic of North Macedonia is, but this is, we're looking at what was Macedonia going from roughly there all the way east to the Black Sea. Next slide, please. So here you see Macedonia very clearly with its capital, Pella. And there are two parts to Macedonia, broadly speaking, a lowland east and an upland west. And what the achievement of Alexander's ancestors was to bring the two bits of the kingdom together. Next slide, please. The greatest king of Macedon before Alexander was his dad, Philip II. And this is a little ivory from a coffin, probably, from a tomb, which is reckoned to be that of Philip, not actually at Pella, but at the original capital, the old capital, you might call it the ceremonial capital of Macedon, just a little bit to the west, a place called Ege or Eges, which means something like goat place. And it actually represents quite well the pastoral nature, the fact that sheep, goats, as well as crops, were very important to the economic basis, together with minerals, especially gold and silver. This is the basis of Philip's achievement, which was to unify the kingdom and then conquer pretty much all of Greece. Next slide, please. And this is now the other side of Alexander's physical inheritance, his mother Olympias. Olympias was also Greek. She came from what's called Epirus, northwest Greece, bordering on Albania today. And she was herself, in her own right, a princess, the sister of a ruling, well, king is putting it rather grandly, but at any rate, he was a ruling man in northwest Greece. Next slide, please. And I mentioned that Philip conquered pretty much all mainland Greece, and the battle at which he did that is at Charonia in central Greece, not that far from Athens, in a territory or region known as Boeotia. And we'll move on from there rather swiftly. Next slide, please. So Philip was due to take on the mighty Persian Empire. I'll shortly show you a slide, the extent of the Persian Empire. But before he could actually set foot on the soil of Asia, he'd sent ahead an advance force to make a bridgehead in what is today northwest Turkey. You go over the Hellespont or Dardanelles. He himself was assassinated, rather interestingly, by a member of his bodyguard. And it's very important for us historians to realize Philip was an autocrat. He was an unresponsible nobody. He didn't have to answer to anybody as king of Macedon. He was an autocrat. And his son Alexander not only inherited that position, but exploited it even further by himself going out to Asia in 334, and the decade I mentioned, the unimaginable decade, though of course Alexander must have had some imagination to do what he did, to conceive the possibility of doing what he did. He sets out in 334, he dies very, very young, aged only 32 in 323 BC, but he dies in Babylon, which is in modern Iraq. And here is he, it's called the Alexander Sarcophagus because it's a coffin, not of him, but of one of the non-Greeks that he established in power. As he rolled ever further eastward, he would set up new administrative organizations, having overthrown the original Persian organization. And this is the sarcophagus of one of his, as it were, lieutenants. But there he is, Alexander himself, a cavalryman, not an infantryman, and at the point of slaying a Persian, you can see him on his horse falling off to the right. Next slide, please. So there is the Persian Empire, a little bit earlier than Alexander's own time, but I put it on because it shows very clearly the massive extent. Once upon a time, the Persians tried to conquer mainland Greece. I mean, you ask yourself why tiddly push Greece way over in the west when they had all this vast extent from what's today Western Turkey to what's today Afghanistan and Pakistan. Next slide, please. And so I'm afraid this may not be all that clear to you, but it shows again the same scene as in the previous slide. This is the empire of the Persians that Alexander conquered. And I'm just going to mention 4 major battles, each of them quite extraordinary, but I would add to them an extraordinary siege, which took him nearly 9 months, an island off what is today Lebanon, a place called Tyre. So my point being, Alexander didn't only win pitched battles in which he himself fought in the front on horseback, but he also won other kinds of contest with other branches of the Persian Empire, sometimes by sea, but mainly by land. So first of all, May 334, Battle of the Granikos River in northwest Turkey. Alexander himself nearly killed, just saved at the last minute. A battle against not the great king of Persia himself yet, but against his local, regional, provincial governors. A terrific victory, over a river. So the Persians were on one side of the river, Alexander on the other. Alexander risked going across and taking the Persian side on. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I'll hang on with this slide, excuse me. Next battle. Imagine going down to, yes, the Battle of Issus. Thank you for that cursor, which was in November of 333. By that time, Darius, based, of course, in Iran, that's where the Persian Empire had its base, tracked all the way to the west because he realized that he now needed to confront Alexander in person. Another river, another battle which actually Alexander possibly should have lost, but Alexander, by both was the battle that Alexander needed to win. It's a famous mosaic. If you go to the Naples Museum, you'll see Alexander on horseback terrifying Darius in his chariot, and Darius III, the great emperor of Persia, flees the battlefield of Issus, leaving behind his wife, his mother, and a daughter. So he allowed Alexander to capture the immediate members of his family. Next battle. Move yourself further to the east. Imagine you're in what's now northern Iraq, near Erbil, for example, which is Kurdish northern Iraq. The decisive battle of the entire contest was fought on the 1st of October 331. Alexander was outnumbered vastly. Darius may have had more than 1 million people on his side, including scythed chariots and war elephants. These are things which Alexander had never faced before. So brilliant improvisation together with courage and extraordinary leadership. And then my final example, Alexander's now won. He's conquered the existing Persian Empire. Question is, how far east do you go? His troops decided for him that he was not going to go any further than, well, what is today Pakistan, on that part of the northwest frontier, as it's called. But before he returns towards the west, eventually ending up in Babylon, as I said, where he died, he fought one last major battle at the river Hydaspes, in Greek, Jhelum today, in the spring of 326. And that was where he was confronted yet again with a river, and he had to decide where and how to cross. And here he was fighting a very different sort of army, led by a, well, we call him a Raja, a Parava Raja. Huge man, apparently 2 meters or so tall, and very cleverly, having defeated this unusual war elephants and all sorts of other types of armament that Alexander hadn't faced, he then made a very clever deal. He gave back to that Indian Raja the territory he already possessed, plus a little bit more, thereby guaranteeing his eastern frontier. Altogether, it's thought Alexander and his men walked, marched, rode something like 22,000 miles or 35,000 kilometers. That's about 25 times the distance from John O'Groats in Scotland to Land's End. Unimaginable. If you have been listening, thank you.